Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Well podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. He is a friend of mine. He is a rapper from Canada. His name is Shad. And this is a two-part podcast. So today, you're going to be hearing part one, and then we'll kind of stop in the middle, and then there'll be a part two that'll be out in a week or two. Part one is going to be just getting to know Shad a little bit and digging into his story and how he got to where he got to. And then part two is going to be examining his album, his latest album, and what it says into our society today, and just some of the stuff that he's going through and how he wrote that album. And if you don't know, it's a fascinating album that has so much to say about what we're going through in our world today. Thank you for checking us out, and stay tuned for part one of the podcast with Shad.
Get it, got it, good. Get it, got it, good. They can't kill us cause they can't see us cause they only see fear. Get it, got it, good. They can't kill us cause they can't see us cause they only see fear. Get it, got it, and we're fearless. Damn, it feels good to be back. Damn, it feels good to be black. They keep on killing us, we just keep killing it. Mama said killing is not where the ailing is. Couldn't speak back. Lord knows she been through it. She said a human is not who the villain is. She said it's fear. It's greed and it's pride. You see it inside. That's what the system is built on and what it instills in.
Hello, and welcome to our third episode of season 3 of the Well podcast, or the Conversations at the Well. Today, it is my distinguished honor and pleasure to introduce all of you to my friend, just my brother from way back in my Canadian days and seminary days, Shad. If you don't know him, we're just going to do a little bit of name dropping here. But if you don't know him, he is a rapper. He is a creative. He is a host. He is a father. He is a husband. He's a great friend. Just so many different things. So super excited to have him on. A couple little introductory notes for everybody before we get on. I think we're going to try to have a pretty lengthy conversation here and then try to split this up into maybe like 2 podcasts or so. So we're going to get into a whole bunch of stuff. So we're going to probably record this and then kind of edit it and then release it out to y'all in 2 different sections. So please stay tuned for that. So Shad, thank you for being here, first of all.
Gladly, Pete. It's good to connect again, good to chat, and especially, in a format like this, get into everything.
Yeah. Let me just do a quick little intro, and then we'll give you some background, obviously, as we've done kind of the history of how we know Shad. But let me just intro Shad just because there's many things to go through. But Shad is a Juno winning, which is kind of the Grammys of Canada, if you don't know, Juno winning rapper from, by the way, of London, Ontario, which is a little town or kind of like a little suburb outside of Toronto, Ontario. For those of you that don't know, I used to live in Canada, so I had to do a little thing. My wife should be proud of that. And then he's been making music for, actually I was just searching through YouTube. Shad, you've been in the game and making music for like 13, 14, 15, like some years. This is how, for the listeners, for some perspective, this is how long he's been in the game. 10 to 11 years ago, Justin Bieber was still in his like teenage days doing like, like baby, whatever, like those kind of songs. He's not the Justin Bieber of now. So that's how long Shad has been in the game. He is also, and he's obviously put out a bunch of music. He's also been a host of a couple of different things. He hosted The Q, which is kind of like a music kind of interview series on CBC, which is a network in Canada. And also, I think most recently, and I think something that I've been enjoying is he is the host of Hip Hop Evolution, which is a kind of a documentary kind of look at the history and the evolution of hip hop. And he's been on 4 seasons, and so if you're subscribed to Netflix, or if you watch Netflix, you can get that on Netflix, and he's been all that. And then of course, so many more things. He is, he's just a great brother. I'm so thankful to know him. And we met, oh my goodness, 2009, I believe.
That's exactly right.
2009, we met in Vancouver. I was in seminary at Regent College, which is in Vancouver, British Columbia. He was in the area doing work. And then we had a mutual friend, Sam McLaughlin. Shouts to Sam. And we played ball. I think it was the first time we ever met. We were balling. And then after that, we just kind of liked it, and we just were hanging out, and we just kind of did a few things and continued to hoop. And that's kind of how we got to know each other. And then in the beginning, I had no idea that you were an artist. It was just a dude. Sam was like, hey, yo, I want you to introduce my friend Shad. So he downplayed it, which was dope for me. And then of course I found out. like how talented you are and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, Shad, it's been a minute, but so glad to know you. So that's everyone. That's who Shad is. Again, we'll hopefully you won't forget, but we'll put all of his kind of stuff in the description and in the YouTube, and then also on the pod, on Spotify, Apple, all that stuff, so you can access his music. But we'll talk about a lot of those things. Yeah. First of all, before I kind of introduce why we're having you on this pod, when you look back at everything you've done over the many, many years, like what are some thoughts, some reflections off of just everything that you've been able to do and all the opportunities and the work that you've done?
Man, I'm grateful for it every single day, because if I look back, especially now looking back, not just 10, 12 years ago, but even to when I was a little kid, and my mom has saved some of my journals from like grade 1, or as you guys call it in America, first grade. It's funny to look at those journals, because it's like, I just love telling stories and funny stories and making stuff up. I never cared about toys. I never cared about any of that stuff. Even as a little kid, my instinct has always just been to tell stories and make stuff up and entertain people and try to connect through the imagination. And so every day I feel grateful that that's what I get to do. I get to really do something, spend so much time and energy in a way that makes me just feel connected to who I really am. That's a privilege. I understand that that's a privilege. My dad worked at the factory at GM factory in my hometown, and my mom had a good but not particularly inspiring job. So I understand that the realities that are out there, and so I feel very fortunate every day that I get to create.
Yeah. It's crazy how long you've been doing this. It kind of shows how old we are.
It does show how old we are. I'll say two things. I get to create and also meet people, because people is another joy of my life. You know what I mean? Like just seeing you now and remembering how the fun that we had, hooping and talking and stuff. And I'm sure the people listening know Pete can hoop, man. Pete can hoop. It was as simple as getting on Pete's team and we'd be running them. But like just the joy of people, right? Like I love that. And so I've been able to enjoy those two things for a long time.
Yeah. Well, let's get into kind of why we have Shad on the pod. One, you're a friend of mine and I enjoy you. Like you're just one of the more you're just one of the people that I love and enjoy. It's been way too long. It's unfortunate, but thankful that we have this medium to be able to do so. So one, it's just because Shad's a friend of mine that I've known for a while and things like that. But more importantly, one of the reasons why we have you on is because of everything that's happening in our nation and just the voice. We're going to quote it here in a little bit. I'm going to pull it up, but just what you said in terms of if everyone here knows, and this is not to be political or anything, but when President Trump had the little kind of photo op outside the church right outside the White House, Shad responded with a Facebook post, and in a sermon that I preached, shameless plug, but a sermon that I preached not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, I quoted Shad as just a voice. And in that place, as we're kind of planning out these podcasts, I was like, I gotta get Shad on, and I gotta hear from his own perspective why he decided to post. And then in just doing a little bit more research in terms of like your music and stuff, like you just always use your music to speak. Your music has never been about just commercial fame or money. Your music has always been, and your art has always been about the message and about what you wanted to say. And this last album, again, we'll give you probably some snippets in there. We might even use some of the tracks as kind of the background music to this pod. But man, you say some things that we're going to get into a little bit. And then of course, with all the recent stuff that's happening, you are a Black man living in North America, in one of the biggest cities in the world, in Toronto. And so you obviously have a voice. And so we wanted to hear that. We've said it before, but we as Asian Americans, we can be a little isolated, kind of insular in who we are. And so to kind of have this perspective and to hear it from someone that I trust and that I love so much as a brother, and just kind of those things. And so there's a lot of things that we're going to get to. And then of course, just kind of we'll talk about it and we'll allow you to explain it. But when Shad tells his story, when I met him, I was just recently had I gotten married yet? Anyways, I was either about to be married or had just gotten married. I can't remember exactly when, but I didn't have children. But now I'm married, 3 kids. Shad is now married, 1 child and another one on the way. And so a lot has changed in those days, and so there's a lot of catching up to do. So we'll get into that a little bit as well. But we're super excited to have him on. Shad, kind of free flow. Yeah, tell us your story. How did you get here? Kind of even from the beginning to, like, you talked about how you've always loved to tell stories, and then just kind of how you got into music and kind of the whole history. We'd love to just kind of hear about who you are.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of starting into music, it wasn't my plan growing up, for sure. And I think as an immigrant, so my family's from Rwanda. We came to Canada when I was a baby. So our communities probably share some similarities in that sense. As immigrants, the priority is obviously education and securing some kind of stability. So that was the trajectory that I was on. I finished high school. I went to study business. And but it was during that time that I really started to discover I started to discover 2 things. One, music was something that very naturally I worked hard at. I couldn't help but, if the words weren't right and it took all day, it just takes all day. And that's just what it is. I can't stop until I'm satisfied with it. That was an important insight for me, because then at the same time, I'm studying business and finding it very hard to be motivated. I'm working, we have what we call co-op jobs. So every 4 months we do 4 months of school and then 4 months in a work environment. And I'd be in my work placement, again, struggling to be motivated, and really at that point realizing, okay, I'm not sure if I can really excel in that world because I don't have that intrinsic motivation. Now I can do it if I need to do it. Again, we're talking about the realities of life. Not everybody can do something that they love to do, whatever. But it made me go, that combined with just discovering the passion that I had for music and for creating, that made me go, you know what? I think I need to invest more time and energy into what I really love and what I really have the capacity to, make a contribution in. And I heard a couple like real gems around that time. So, and one of them was actually ironically in business school. And what the person said was, like, HR departments, human resources, they've discovered that you actually have your highest capacity for improvement in your area of strength, not your area of weakness. It's interesting, but if you think about it, it makes sense.
Yep.
Right? Like let's take it to basketball. It's like, if you have talent, you can get great. If you don't have talent, you can get okay. Yep. So, we all know that to be true, but it's counterintuitive a little bit. So, hearing little gems like that, and then also I think there's a spiritual component to it too, and sort of coming to this understanding of, look, if I've been created a certain way with certain things that give me joy, in a pure way, it's not about ego, it's not about adulation or anything like that. It's just a genuine enjoyment of certain things. Why would I not pour this, very little time we have on earth? Why wouldn't I pour more of that into the things that I've been created to get enjoyment from? It was a very simple realization, but it's like, why not? That's not wasted time. And that doesn't necessarily have to be professional. It's just like, we've been given this one little precious life, and we've been given these things that give us a sense of joy, give us a sense of wonder. And I think it's not right to not invest some time into those things if you can. And at that point in time, I could. So I'm rambling a little bit, but I just kind of want to give a sense of like how I got started, because from there, to me, it was all just this sort of natural building blocks. I got to make my first album when I was still in undergrad, and then that led to the opportunity to make another, which led to the opportunity to make another, which, about, let's say 10 years in, led to the opportunity to host this show on CBC, which is our public broadcaster, and then to host Hip Hop Evolution on Netflix. So from there, which to a lot of people is maybe the more interesting part of the story. But to me, that's all very natural. That's just one thing leading to the other. The more complicated part to sort out was really at the beginning. And I'd say that's how I got started into doing this more seriously.
Yeah, we'll get into other parts of your story, but it's really interesting because both of our guests so far, at least on the season 3, we've kind of, redone or reshaped our podcast to really just have stories for folks and engaging with people's stories. That's kind of what they've been saying. Just as Christ followers, again, we had a senior VP of a record label, so something right up your alley, a pastor, and then now you. But everyone is basically talking about like, you got to do that which is on your heart. You got to follow the passions that God has given to you. And I love how you said it's almost not right for you to invest time into that. It may not be vocationally, it may not be professionally, but to not invest something into that. And then just the thing that you said, like, we have more room to grow in our strengths than our weaknesses. Like, not everyone can be LeBron James. Only a certain people who have that God-given ability can get to the heights that he gets to. Of course, for us in our generations, that's the GOAT, the MJ. But I digress. But just kind of those ideas that's kind of like what you were doing and kind of how you did that. And you're absolutely right. Kind of the cultural, similarities between y'all and us as Asians. Like for us, we're told. And one of the things that my friend Grace, our first guest, her becoming one of, there aren't very many Asian American, Korean American females in her business and doing what she's doing. But she had to take a lot of, risks and step out and really do what she felt like she loved rather than just becoming the person that everyone else wanted to, which is, for both she and I, we were both about to go to law school. And I'm right there with you. Like, I was studying for law and I'm a nerd and I love studying, but I just hated it. Like, I couldn't do it. And I just I can't do this. But the one thing that I loved was working in the church, serving. And so it was just a passion that God had developed. And I might be an okay lawyer if I had decided to be a lawyer, but I think this is kind of where God has me. And the room for growth and the room for the potential is just great. And I think we're trying to help our young people to be like, you don't have to be the stereotypical thing that our parents have always wanted. And we understand why they want it to be that way, but there's more than to that. And your story is just a testament to that. Now, not everyone gets to be a Juno winning artist, but at the same time, I think like you said, just kind of that feeling where you're like, no matter how long it took just to get the words right and just do that even at a young age. And then producing your first album while in undergrad, that's insane. So
cool. Yeah, I'm glad that message can go out to younger people too. And especially the message that there's something in our faith that can liberate us to do that. I feel fortunate for that, because I do see a lot of young people really struggle with that question, especially if they have those inklings or those feelings pushing them towards doing something unconventional. A lot of young people struggle with those feelings and what does this mean? And how do I, just kind of what does that mean? And I think there's something in our faith that can liberate us and say, well, you're loved, you're good the way you are, those feelings that you have in you, they're good. Putting time into those things and getting enjoyment gives God enjoyment.
Right.
In some sense. So I would encourage young people to try to think about it that way. And maybe even taking the professional piece out of it for a second. That really helped me. I decided not to label myself an artist. I just said, the important thing is that I want to make this album right now. And that's what I'm working on. That's all I need to know. I don't need to know. I don't need the label of a career to define myself. The only thing that's important is the thing that I feel compelled to make now and focusing my energy on that. Committing maybe a certain amount of time, a year, 2 years, whatever it is that I feel called to commit to it. And that's it. The label doesn't matter. The label comes afterwards, or other people will apply that to you.
Yeah. And I'm sure that first album, though you made it, it wasn't like you were doing it in a studio with a record label. Like you were just making an album, right? Like you were just kind of producing it. And this is back in the day when, there was tools to do that. There are no tools like, that anyone can grab onto. We didn't have the mediums that we do now where you can just put your music on SoundCloud or whatever the case might be. Yeah. Give us a little insight onto that kind of first thing. Cause I want to I want to kind of get your insight onto like the struggle, because everyone, from an Asian perspective, just for for everyone out there, one of the reasons why we don't get into kind of our passions oftentimes is because there isn't a nicely paved road, as opposed to, hey, if you go get good grades during high school and you get that degree, and then you get to a good school and you study whatever, business, med, whatever. And, there's a very defined way and a defined path. Like there's steps that you got to take. And so, though for you, your career has been a natural, like one thing led to another, there's obviously struggles within, and particularly starting off as an undergrad student, obviously who, I mean, I don't know how your parents are, but I'm sure they weren't jumping out the bed, like, being like, oh my goodness, my son's gonna be a rapper. Like, that's probably not the reaction that they had. As much as our parents love us, being a successful artist is not something that everybody does. So I'm sure they had their reservations as well, along with you. So take us kind of in a time machine and going back to that kind of first album. What was that like, and how did you persevere and just kind of push through, being where you were?
Well, it's amazing to think about. So when I think of when I made that first album, 2005 is when it came out. Okay. To me, because I'm now a little bit older, like that doesn't seem like that long ago. Okay. But let me just paint the picture of what was going on then. There was no YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook was just a thing for a few universities and colleges in America. It wasn't even in Canada yet.
Yep.
Or just had entered maybe 2004, maybe. Okay. Let alone Twitter, let alone Instagram, let alone TikTok, like Snapchat. Like, no, these things. Okay. So.
Oh, funny though. Sorry to interrupt you. Yes. Sorry to interrupt you. When I met my wife, because I met her in Canada, this is how, for the listeners who may not understand, Facebook back then was the only thing that was available. There was no other thing. Unless you consider like Zynga and blogging or whatever, but that's half the people don't even know what that is. But those days, it was so like old school and dated that there was even a messaging function. If you wanted to communicate with somebody on Facebook, you had to write on their wall, and then they had to write on your wall back, which means you had to keep track of the conversation like in your own brain, because you couldn't, like, you know what I mean? So anyways, I digress, but yeah, go ahead.
Exactly, right? Like this is so yeah, it doesn't feel like that long ago to me. I don't feel that different, but it was a different world. And from the standpoint of the music industry, therefore, like also a very, very different world. So what happened for me around then was there was this unsigned talent competition put on by this radio station. And I was fortunate enough to win that competition, and the winners got money to record. Because back then, again, there was no thing of like, get a laptop and it's loaded with everything that you need.
Yep.
No. First of all, we all had desktop computers. Secondly, like, this was not, really what it was this. There was probably 3-4 studios in a city that could reasonably record music at a good level.
Yep.
When I'm working on this album, 0405. So on one hand, those are challenges. On the other hand, what it meant was that not a lot of people were doing it. Okay. So when I finished making this album and got it pressed up on CDs with nice artwork and a nice website, suddenly I was like half in the game. Okay. Because in 2005, if you had a CD that looked good and you had a website that looked good, people were like, oh, okay, like you're a legit independent artist and your friends all want to support and all this stuff. It's not like now. It's a lot harder. Everyone's made 10 albums by the time they're 15. You know what I mean? And so there were challenges. Everything was much, much harder to get started. But once you had created something, there were some opportunities there. But what I'd say is this. Again, it goes back to what I was saying about what you have passion for, or if you don't have passion for something. The challenges feel very, very different. All those challenges of starting out for me, I don't remember them as challenges at all. I don't remember those feelings. I remember the excitement of getting to do things for the first time. You play a horrible concert, what I would now call a horrible concert. Five people are there and no one's paying attention or whatever. But for me back then, it was like, that was fun. I've never played in that city before, or like I don't remember it as challenges, versus if I was doing something else, everything would feel like drudgery, even if it wasn't that hard. So I think there's a thing that, there's a thing there that has to do with your passion. There's also a thing there that has to do with your phase of life. We're fathers now. So if I'm going to go on the road, it has to really make sense. The tour has to be because I really need to support this album or promote it, or the festival has to be a very good opportunity. Versus when I was starting out, when it was like, oh yeah, I'll play your grandma's birthday, and I'll love it, while they all boo me, sure. Like it's fantastic. So I think I'm losing track of your question a little bit, but yeah, challenges. That's what it felt like. And no, there's no prescribed path with making music. So it's not for everybody. I'll say that. Right. You really have to be someone who's comfortable with tolerating that a little bit.
Right.
But there's also different approaches, man. Like my approach was always, because I started at this time again, where you had artists that were in the game, and then you had this tier of independent artists. And if you made it into that tier, you had a chance to, go up another step. So, no, there was no prescribed path, but there were opportunities, and there was a. What I'm trying to get at is there was a kind of low risk. Low risk isn't the right word. There was but kind of. There was an independent hustle you could do, where you could start out and say, okay, well, let me just try and build an audience in 10, 15 cities of 50 people, 100 people. If I can play a show, make this much money in those cities, if I can sell this many CDs independently, well, that's not bad. And then if I can level up, then I can level up. So there was this sort of approach that I took that didn't involve trying to find, $500,000 in investments to really blow something up in a big marketing budget. I tried to do it in a way that really made sense for me. It wasn't going to put me in debt. I'm not a fan of that, So yes, there's no prescribed path, but there are ways you can do it that can be sort of slow and lower risk, if you get creative a little bit, and if that's kind of your sensibility. So, well,
something that you said that I think is amazing, and that thing you kind of just nail, is this idea that though the beginning was challenging, it wasn't like a challenge to you. It wasn't drudgery. And then when you said that, again, that brings me back to kind of my own story. Like I hated studying for law school. Like I absolutely hated it. Like, could you do it? Yeah, you could do it, but you just hated it. Like it was such work. And then when we're talking about, for me, ministry and just kind of, serving at the church and looking at that, like it wasn't work. It's difficult. Like don't let anybody tell you that studying Hebrew or whatever, at least for a pastor, like it ain't, that it ain't work, or, just, writing lyrics and getting, things down, and all the, all the creative process that an artist does, and all the fine tuning, like you said, like getting everything right so that, it's exactly as you want it. Like don't tell, that is work, but it isn't work in that sense. Like it isn't drudgery. Like, the process, or even like you said, playing at a show and, maybe somebody's, like, I don't know, like birthday party or whatever in the beginning, but that's an opportunity. And I think that's a really important thing. I think we just don't have, because I think in many ways, I think what's the difference between now, I think then, as you're kind of describing it, for me, this is kind of what came to mind, is that now I feel like everyone is trying to be product oriented. Like you have so many examples of like excellent products, and so you don't appreciate the process, and so you don't really develop your own voice and who you are as a person and the things that you're trying to do. So like, even for instance, like there's a couple of students here that I work with, and young people, and I'm trying to get them into like video, because I think that they're really talented at it. But at the same time, they don't, because they have so many different, it's not like we didn't have obviously mentors or role models or people that we're looking up to. But I can only imagine what it was like for you to interview all those people in hip hop that you were doing, people that you grew up on, all that stuff. But it's a little different because I think now everything seems so polished, and all the amateurs seem so polished, and like you said, you just buy a MacBook Pro or whatever, and it comes loaded with all the junk, and like you can just kind of do it. There's that hustle and there's that grind, which is your own personal grind, but it wasn't drudgery. It wasn't like, oh, like I gotta get up and do this again. Like you were doing it, and you loved it, and that's kind of, I think, a thing that we need to hear is that God has created us a certain way. And the next question that I was going to ask you is, how do you feel like your understanding of kind of who God has made you to be, and therefore faith, which has always been, a primary component of your life, how did that kind of help you in that? Because I think that's the other thing is, like, if you're motivated by certain things, then that process might be different. I'm thinking that maybe some people who are hearing this might be like, well, that's just Shad. That's just, he is who he is. It's kind of like, like not everyone's LeBron. So you can't just be like, so the Shad is Shad. Like he had the talent, he had the gift or whatever, the drive, the hustle. But I feel like a part of that is, like you said, you're free to be able to do this. You mentioned that earlier, like God frees you to do this. Like, give us a little insight into how that played.
Definitely. So there's a couple things I'll say. One, just to kind of sum up on the last question, there's a thing I realized, again, in that kind of critical time in my life where I was in school studying business and also starting to make some music. And one thing I realized is that I think there's challenges that make you better, and there's challenges that wear you down. And that's how I sort of sum up that thing, right? Like there was work I was doing in school or work terms. I was like, yep, this is challenging for sure. This is hard, but it's just wearing me down. It's not making me better. Whereas, music, yes, it was challenging too, but I was realizing, wow, this is making me more courageous. These challenges are making me better in my soul, making me more honest, brave, these sorts of things, right? Versus the other challenges I was facing in school were just making me more tired, more weary, maybe kind of chipping away at my faith a little bit in the broader sense of the term, of just sort of my belief in myself and in purpose and these sorts of things. So I'll just say that to sum that up. Yeah, man, in terms of how my faith impacted that journey, well, in so many ways, but I would say the biggest thing is that liberation piece, that feeling that the way that I am is good. And also orienting me towards making a contribution towards other people.
Right.
I think that's such an important function of what we believe, right? Like, I don't know about you, but like for me, my prayer life, all that basically gets my thinking off myself. It helps me in that, right? So, and I think that's such a major thing, especially for artists, because our work is very solitary sometimes and involves a lot of introspection, and there can be a lot of, therefore, man, your mind just goes on you. And then on top of that, wow, then you put your stuff out into the world and you're under a microscope and you're scrutinized, and you're kind of risking something in terms of, your reputation, in terms of just, putting yourself out there. That is a lot of temptation to really be focused on yourself. So that was another huge, huge component for me, and a huge helpful thing as far as my spiritual practice is being able to reorient myself on a regular basis out towards other people and say, how can I contribute? How can what I have intersect with what people need?
Right. Man, like let's take a moment and just kind of break that down a little bit, just because, man, that is truth on so many different levels. First of all, when you were saying how the challenges that you had, the the ones that were good for you, ones that kind of affirmed who you are, they made you better. They made you more like Christ. And, all these qualities, like you said, brave and courageous and honest and patient, all those things. It reminds me of the Lord's Prayer, that portion where it says, the very, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. That word temptation in Greek actually has two meanings. One is test and one is temptation. And the way that I've learned it is that temptation is anything that's designed to make you fail. So like that's going off of, making you more tired and weary and kind of eating away at you and kind of, breaking you down. Whereas a test is something that was meant to approve and improve your faith. So it shows that you got it. And then it's also supposed to improve that faith. So it's like,
that's
a
beautiful.
Good test. Right. A good test that you take in school shows that not only do you have this knowledge that you're supposed to have, but it's supposed to make you have more of it. Right. And so you're talking about the challenge in the process. Like, that's exactly what that is. It's like, and we pray in that prayer that Jesus teaches is like, give us tests that's going to approve. They're not easy. They're challenges. And that's the thing is like you said, they're challenges, but if they're the right tests, then they approve that we are kind of good. As you said, we're on the right path, for lack of a better, phrase. But then they also improve and they make us more into who Christ has made us to be and who are kind of our design is, rather than temptation is supposed to like tear you down. Right. And then so it says, and then protect us from the evil one whose desire is to tempt and then tear us down, whereas God's desire is to approve and to improve. I think that's crucial because
that's beautiful. I'd never heard that before. That's amazing.
Yeah, because that's to me, and like you put it in a way where like that's the way, like we just for people who are listening, we just took theology and put it down in like a ground level so people can really understand. But like that's kind of the process that we often don't. Not all challenges are made the same. Not all challenges have the same outcome. And I think that's one thing that we don't understand is that if you have the right challenges, doesn't mean that they're not difficult. Doesn't mean that there isn't struggle. Doesn't mean that it doesn't require work, right? Just because you love something doesn't mean that you're not going to work at it. Actually, the opposite. You work harder at the things that you love. Clearly, your life has shown that. And so there's that aspect. I think that's so crucial to tell people. But then the next piece that I think you talked about, and again, we're going to just kind of dive a little bit into, is you're talking about how freedom for you to be an artist, freedom for you to be Shad the way that God made you, freedom for you to express who you are, and therefore work hard and do all that thing, is this process where, because you recognize that the way you've been made is good. And in today's day and age, and we'll get to this a little bit later, whether that's in part 1 or part 2, who you are as a Black man, that you are good, made that way. And then all about who you are and your family, where you come from, all that stuff, your roots is all good. And then what it did, and you said this, and this is mind blown, like that realization didn't put the focus more on you. It actually liberated you to look at things outside of you, oriented towards who God has made you to be, and then how you can contribute and kind of that intersection between you and others. And that's what's allowed you to be the person that I am. And I think we have a very different understanding of freedom. And then to hear it from someone like you, Shad, just for me, as I'm reacting, is you're an artist. Your name is on everything. You are like, artists are self-promoted, and you have to be. You have to promote yourself. It is your work that you do. And yet you're talking about a process where, as an artist whose job is to have your name on everything, you get the recognition, you win the awards, whatever the case might be, that all of it has not been about, like, it hasn't put the microscope or the, the magnifying glass on you, but it's rather actually turned your lens and your view outwards towards other. And that's been kind of the key to allow you
that's
to do
the key.
Right? Like, can you take us a little bit like further into that? Because I think that's, if you just, I think you and I vibe off of that. You and I, we understand that, but I don't think everybody else gets that. I think they're like, how? What do you mean? Like, everyone is telling you how great you are. Everyone is praising you for your work. Everyone is saying, man, your creativity or your lyricism or whatever the case might be, like your musicality, all that, so on and so forth. Like, it's all about you. And yet you're saying the further free you become and the more you become of yourself and understand your goodness, and the more deeper you get into your work and it becomes more your voice. I'm sure in the process from, in 04 versus this latest album and all the work that you've been putting out lately, it's more Shad now than it was even in 04, because you're understanding yourself more. How, like, give us a little insight into like how that is for you, because I think that's a part that it just seems stupid kind of hearing it, if you're just being honest. But
yes. Yeah, man. I mean, I think it's profound, and it is deeply spiritual, man, because um how can I explain it? Well, I guess I'll explain it in a couple ways. One is it's probably affected even how I look at scripture and the central story of scripture, especially differently, right? Like in many senses, we know the end of the story, okay? But in many senses, Christ submitted himself, well, we know this, to humiliation, to what looks very apparently like failure in the critical moment.
Right.
And so as artists, I think you also have to, that's inspiration for me to offer myself in that way and go, I need to be willing to be humiliated, to potentially have all appearances of failure, okay? Because what I'm really doing is I'm just offering what I have. Same way Christ did, right? Like he, man, if you think about it, right? Like we read it knowing what happened after.
Yep.
You know, so in terms of, I guess what I'm getting at is in terms of the approach as artists, my approach as an artist is like, I derive tremendous inspiration from that. That idea that, you know, who I serve and try to emulate went through it with that level of selflessness. And he was followed, you know, and this is at a point in his story where he's being followed. He has a following. He has people who look up to him, and he was willing to be humiliated. He had that level of selflessness and other focus kind of mind. So I guess that's one thing that I want to bring up, because I think that the best thing we can do as artists is put ourselves out there, risk something. I think that's what we love about artists. We watch them risk something. We watch them up there. We watch them up there on the high wire, risking falling.
Yeah,
you're out there. You're risking falling, and you know it. And okay, if we want to extend that metaphor, if you talk to anybody who does that sort of trapeze type of stuff, it's like the last thing you can be thinking about is falling. You got to be thinking about putting one foot in front of the next. You got to have your sight on the horizon. Right. You got to have a passion for entertaining all those people that are watching you. The last thing you can be thinking about is you.
Right.
If you want to do it right. So, you know, I think, and that takes, if there's anything that's work, Pete, that's the work. That discipline, because a lot of things are trying to make you focus on yourself. Your name is out there. Your image is out there. The number of likes is out there. The media is out there. There's a lot of things that are trying to get you to focus on protecting yourself instead of offering yourself. And I don't think it's that different in a lot of work, to be honest. You know, I'm sure also as leader of a community, a leader of a congregation, there's probably also some temptation to, you know, protect a certain appearance or whatever, you know, and you know it too. There's a tremendous discipline involved in putting that aside and going, no, I exist to serve.
Right.
Even if I'm the head of this thing, even if I'm the face of this thing, that's not my job, is not to be the head of this thing or the face of this thing. Right. My job is to offer what I have. So I'll just say that in sum, man, like that's the hard work. If there's anything that's the hard work, that's the hard work, because the skills you develop the skills over time. It's a joy to develop the skills. So that's not hard. You get to a certain point where you know how to perform, you know how to write, just like you know how to write a sermon, you know how to speak to people. But what makes it special is when you're giving yourself, when you're risking
Mm-hmm.
something.
Yep.
I'm sure it's the same when you're giving a sermon. You know, what really makes it touch people is when you're stepping out, taking a bit of a risk.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not to just be biblical, but like for the joy set before him, Christ endured the cross, right? Like that's the whole idea. You're absolutely right. Like everyone thought he had failed. Like he was a colossal failure in so many people's eyes, except for the people that saw it, right? Like the soldier at the foot of the cross and some other folks. But you know, that's what you do. And that freedom, I think, is the elusive thing. I understand freedom. One of the better definitions for me about freedom is the ability to not be influenced by anything else other than just the goodness of whatever it is that you're doing, right? To outside circumstances don't matter. You're just doing the thing for the goodness of the thing. And that the freedom to be able to make those kind of decisions. And that's kind of what you're getting at, is like you put yourself out there. You're right. Like you got to put yourself out there.
Got to.
I think that's a really interesting kind of segue to talk about something that I think everyone is interested in, which is in particular your music. As an artist, let me just put it this way. You don't ever curse in your music, not that I know of. And the closest thing, and I don't know if people would consider this cursing, but the closest thing is in the full part 1, in the most recent, you says, damn, it feels good to be back. Damn, it feels good to be black. So like, if you consider that cursing, well, then maybe we misspoke. But outside of that, you don't curse. None of your music is like objectifying women or any of that stuff. I think one of the music videos you shot on an iPhone, I saw that, and so anyone can listen to your lyrics. Anyone can listen to what you say. It is extremely thought provoking. Obviously musicality off the charts, some of that stuff. But I think, you know, in essence, I think if we're being, I don't know if this terminology is dated or whatever, but it's like you never sold out to the game. You were true to yourself throughout the process, making the kind of music and the kind of message that you wanted to send. What drives your message? What is it that you're trying to, obviously each album has its own kind of thing. We'll get into, in particular, the most latest one a little later. But what drives kind of the things that you wanted to say? Oh, by the way, I was doing a little research. On my boy Shad, and you put out a rock pop album under the pseudonym of your boy Tony Braxton. Never knew. I was just listening. I was like, what is this? You sing? Like, anyways, that's a whole nother. You can look that up. Maybe we'll put the link. Maybe we'll put some of that stuff. But Shad put out a rock pop album under a pseudonym. But anyways, so what are you trying to say in your music? Because that's kind of the big thing is, as artists, you have control, hopefully, over the message, over the things that you want to say. What kind of drives? What is it that you're trying to say overall, if you had to kind of describe it?
Totally. So, for me, my journey into music, if I were to begin with what influenced me, it was artists like Common and Lauryn Hill and Outkast and CeeLo, different artists that I heard in high school. These names might not be familiar to a younger audience, but it's who I listened to in high school. And man, what really blew my mind about those artists was that they had something to say. Was exactly that they put themselves out there. They were telling stories I'd never heard before. And so when it was time for me to make music, it's like, those are my heroes. So I didn't want to be out there as a copy, even a copy of them. I wanted to be out there as me. I wanted to make a unique contribution the way I saw them make a unique contribution. And even if that doesn't mean having the most fans in the world, and I would still consider myself an underground artist in terms of audience and also in terms of style, the thing that always just interested me in music was being unique. And so I'm always looking for that. And so it was never really a challenge for me to stay true to certain things, because that's all that ever interested me in music. I'm not really even interested in any other style. So there's a part of that I can't take credit for, because it's really the only thing that I care about and that I find interesting and fun about music. So there's that. As far as what my message is, I never really thought I had a specific message until I think after my most recent album. And because in many ways it's a bit of a departure, but at the end of it, I was like, wow, I keep saying the same thing. I actually say it on the song. I say, one of the last songs I say, I guess I'm still singing the same song, the one about trying. Because I think that if there's one message I have in my music, it's just keep going, keep trying, don't give up. And I think that's because that's what I need to hear maybe most days is like, do not give up, just keep going. Few more steps, few more steps, few more steps. Every once in a while, you can look back and see how far you've come. And that can give you a little bit more energy and motivation to keep going. But, you know, ultimately, if I had to sum up what my music is about, that's kind of what it's about. And I guess if I had to sum it up, it's that. Now, keep going, to me, it means keep going in terms of keep fighting to tell the truth and not have your voice stifled. Keep fighting to be loving. Keep fighting, keep trying to bring peace and joy into the world. So it means a lot of things. If I had to sum it up, it's keep trying, but trying in all those ways. Keep trying to embody all those values that I believe are important and that, you know, that I feel called to embody, and don't just give up, and don't just take the easy road, and don't take the shortcuts. That's kind of what I'd say my message is. And the last thing I'll say, because you brought up the language that I use or the language that I don't use, you know, one cool thing for me about my journey is always trying to figure out how to be myself within hip hop. You know, I've always liked that creative challenge of like, well, this is who I am. This is how I was raised. I was raised not to use those words, and I don't use those words. So how can, again, like the artists I looked up to were themselves. How can I be myself? How can I not compromise those aspects of myself and those values that I was taught and that I believe, but still exist in this world and still make a contribution to this world and still be dope? You know, that's been a fun creative challenge for me, you know, throughout my career.
Have you, in your music career, this is just a little, give us people who don't know anything. Have you had pressure to kind of conform from, you know, a label or from people? Have you heard, and, you know, have you been asked and be like, yo, Shad, if you did it this way, if you just kind of did this like this, then, you know, you would blow up or whatever. You would, you know, be, you know, you reach more people, yada, yada, yada. Without having to put anybody down, but like, what's your, you know, story about some of those type of things?
Well, I'd say two things. One is I've been pleasantly surprised how little that happens, because, you know, what's really cool is when you put your stuff into the world, you know, and when you're an artist and you finish something, you know, you often don't know if it's good or bad or whatever. But to see other people in the business, people who you think know better than you, really support who you are and what you're doing, and just go, you know, there's something real about this, and I just want to help. I don't want to change it. I just want to help. And realizing that that's a powerful thing that we have as people that love to create is, well, we can give energy to all those folks, you know, folks that we think know better than us, that we think on the business side of things might tell us to change or be a certain way. They're just excited to work on something real. They love music. That's why they got into it. They got into it because they were touched by music. And so that's been a pleasant surprise. As far as where I have been asked to change certain things, it's always been in little ways. And isn't that exactly how it works, right, in life? You know, it's never just like a big bag of money in exchange for changing who you are. You know, that's not the way evil, if we can use that term, works in the world. It's a lot more subtle.
Yep.
It's little things, man. It's little things. And it's a process to negotiate that all the time. By negotiate that, what I really mean is like, it's a process to figure out and draw those lines for yourself, because it's not perfectly clear. So I'll give a couple examples. you and I both love basketball. So there was a time, I told this story recently in an interview, but it was NBA 2K11 or something like that. Wanted to license one of my songs. And they said, we like the song, we want to license it into the video game, which in my world is a good opportunity.
That's crazy.
And they said, now there's just a couple lyrics we need you to change because it's a game for, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds. And I was like, oh, that's interesting because my music's not really, as we've been discussing, objectionable in those ways. But one of the words was slave. I used the word slave in one of the verses. Ironically, it was actually a verse where I'm talking about the story of Shadrach from the Old Testament.
It's a good name. The good name song.
A good name, yeah, exactly.
Interestingly,
so it's like they're trying to censor like the most PG. I'm telling a Bible story. It's PG as it gets. But what I felt like was they didn't like the word slave in this video game that has all these Black people, descendants of slavery in it. Because I don't think that's an inappropriate word. And I might be wrong on that. I'll say that freely. And that's what I mean by we have to figure out, it's not always clear, right? Like I could have taken that opportunity. That would have maybe been okay. But there was something inside of me that was like, I don't like that. That feels like compromise to me. That feels like they're trying to erase the truth and, an important truth. And maybe this will flow into some of the other things we might talk about. But there's a thing that happens when you erase these things from memory. When people can watch, let's say, the NBA and be completely oblivious to, they're loving these Black athletes, but completely oblivious to the realities that those athletes come from in many cases, the circumstances that created those circumstances that they come from. This is just one word in one song. It's not changing the world. This is what I mean. It's not like a big bag of money for one, but to me, it felt like I would be making a little contribution to the erasure of history. And I was like, no, I can't do that. And so they didn't license the song. And, so I look back at that, I say, was that the right decision? I don't know. I don't actually know. But that's how I felt. And those are the kinds of questions I have to negotiate from time to time. There's a number of examples like that. They come up once a week, once a month. And sometimes I'll be like, you know what, that's okay. And other times I'll be like, I don't feel okay about that. And so that's how it plays out for me in my work. It's a lot of small decisions that come up all the time, and trying to be present to, really, scrutinize the questions that come up out of these different opportunities and stuff, and try to make the right decision.
This may not be the most natural segue because we're going to talk about, as you alluded to, your message and some of the stuff you said a little bit later in the pod. But I think this is kind of like timing wise, we're kind of getting close to the end of part one. But I want to talk about your family a little bit. And again, I may be forcing the segue a little bit, but how is it different? Because I'm sure the stuff that you put out and the work that you do now is a little different because you're married, you've got a child, another one coming along the way. Like, how does that and those choices and kind of even negotiating who you are, not just as a man, but as a husband and as a father, and then a father of a young girl. I'm thankful enough to have one daughter. I'm so thankful that God blessed me with a daughter rather than just all sons. Just to think it just makes me a better man to have a daughter. But how has that kind of been different? Because and obviously there's all the stuff like timing wise, like everything is different. Like you said, when you go on tour and you got children, like, there's the logistics, so, be present, all that stuff. But like, even just kind of who you understand yourself as becoming a husband and then becoming a father, like how has that changed, and kind of how are you negotiating those kind of spaces in terms of who you are and your music and your message?
Totally, and it relates to what we're talking about in terms of challenges and good challenges and bad challenges. One thing I've loved, and it's been a pleasant surprise through my career, is just seeing these new creative challenges that pop up as I enter different stages of life. And one of them is having a partner and having a family. It's like, okay, well, these are first of all, new themes to touch on or not touch on in my music, but that presents a new kind of creative question there. And marriage and family life in particular, in terms of putting that into my music, well, that's a real challenge. It's very hard to do that well. And I don't know if I will ever, attempt to do that or whatever, but I do like the fact that that's a creative challenge that could be there for me. Is like because we do need good songs and art about marriage, that's honest and affirming, like, it's hard to do. It's really, really hard to do. And so as someone that loves to create, I like things that are hard to do. So that's one thing. The other thing that's been a surprise for me is I always thought if I had a kid, I would be extra motivated to work, and I'm so demotivated by having this beautiful kid around, because it's just a simple joy, right? And it's like a lot of musicians will say, or we know to be true of a lot of musicians, what are our favorite albums by artist X or Y? The one where they were heartbroken, the one where they were miserable,
right.
Because when you do have these simple joys, and I'm not trying to advocate for artists making themselves miserable or anything like that, but when you do have these simple joys in your life, there isn't the urgency necessarily to find a way to express how you're feeling. It's just not quite the same. So, but again, that presents a new creative challenge. How can I continue to do my work and make my contributions in a state of stability and contentment, and not buy into that myth that artists have to be miserable and heartbroken. How can I not buy into that idea and still make inspired stuff? So yeah, it's been a cool new phase of life in so many ways, but including how it affects my work.
It's going to be interesting. I'll ask you a quick question, and then we'll get kind of into some other stuff. But so, can we expect some new music about your family? When I think about family and music, particularly in like kind of hip hop, I think of Will Smith, Just the Two of Us. I think of tracks like that. Things obviously that talk about people. I think about country music. Country music just seems to have kind of that narrative storytelling about families and all that kind of stuff. So there's things like that. And obviously there's tons of stuff about like romance and, and marriage, all that kind of stuff that people do dedicate. But any thoughts in terms of the creative challenge about, expressing some of those joys that you've had in getting married and having a child? And then your number 2's coming, which again, I congratulate you. That's dope. So anything that we can expect, because after this, at least in this little corner of Houston, you're going to have a lot more probably Korean American fans that are going to be listening to your music. And
yeah, I mean, I don't have anything on that, to be honest. The music I've been working on lately has been sort of a continuation of the last album. So a lot of the themes are personal and also looking at the world. But I haven't stumbled on any great songs yet about family. And part of the creative challenge there is you have to protect your family too. So there are stories that I could tell very freely when I was earlier in my career, just as a young single guy. I can offer up my whole life if I want to. Whereas now I have to be more careful about that. There's other people who are just as real as me that I have to think about, in doing that. So I haven't stumbled on any great songs yet about about marriage or about my marriage or about family and my family in particular. It's something I'm looking forward to, but I haven't gotten there yet. There's a lot of, it's hard to do. I like a challenge, but it's hard to do. It's got to be inspired. It's got to come in the right time.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things I'm sure there is out there, but as a pastor, just from my perspective, the one thing that I don't really see is I don't really see a whole lot of like pre-parenting classes, like the church helping young couples as they get ready to have children. There's a ton of premarital stuff. Obviously, marriage stuff is all over the place, and I'm not even going to try to contribute my own little thing to it. There's too many slices of the pie that's already out there. But when I think about pre-parenting things, it's like there isn't a whole lot, if I'm being honest, and the things that aren't contextualized, obviously, to different ethnic, and cultural, capacities and stuff like that. So that kind of, that rings true for me. Is kind of that challenge of like, yeah, it's not something that's really out there. It's not something you can find very easily, readily available, but, something that you're going to be able to do. Because I know that, my experience, and I'm sure it is the same kind of idea. You're right. Sharing about my life and sharing about my family and all those things. It's been, it's been just kind of a, it's such a blessed experience, but at the same time, yeah, it's not just me. I can't just do whatever I want. I have to think about my family and think about those things. And so, but they shape and I am who I am because of that. Kind of to finish off this first portion, give me your favorite story of being a father. Just kind of, one that you enjoy. And then, like I said, we'll kind of transition into part 2, which we'll talk about some stuff I'm sure people are anticipating. But yeah, give me your favorite story about being a father.
Yeah. Well, so far, Pete, it's all these simple moments. So the first story that comes to mind is just this past weekend. So Saturday mornings is my morning shift. Or wait, is that right? No, Sunday mornings are my morning shift. It was Sunday morning. My wife takes Saturday morning. So Sunday morning, the kid got up earlier than usual. She got up around 6 or something. So I was a little tired, but we kind of like puttered around the kitchen and stuff for a little bit. And then we went out for a walk around 7:30. So before the sun comes up. We're in Canada, but in Toronto it gets pretty hot. Not Houston hot, but really hot. So, we went out a little bit before the sun came up and we went up around to this park, and we were in this big park just by ourselves, and both took off our shoes, and she's running around, and, I'm running around with her and I'm swinging her around. And to me, I just bring up that story because it's just these simple moments. Like this is just 7:45 in an empty park. The morning dew is on our feet. And it's like, wow, that's beautiful. And it's like in my work, I'll have these moments that are like sort of obviously exciting for me, meeting a hero or performing in front of a big crowd or something. But it's like I get a totally different but equal joy and contentment from moments like that, That kind of like sums up fatherhood for me and why it's so demotivating as an artist. It's like why I do all that work to, get up on stage. I'm being a little bit facetious. It's like, that's amazing too. And in a totally different way, but to have these simple, beautiful moments just every day is cool and new for me.
One, that gives a great insight into, I think, the kind of person that you are. Just that something so, which by the way is I'm imagining. But you have for the listeners, if you're an artist, I think you get it. There's ways that artists, creative people describe things that are just like to the rest of us, like what? How did you how do you paint it like that so that it sounds like that? Number one, and then secondly, I think it just kind of shows the kind of down to earth, but just like real person that you are, that you enjoy these things. And then thirdly, it makes me anticipate that there is going to be some tracks about just the beauty of kind of the normalcy of what it means to be a father, and just a little moments, and just giving us an insight into that music doesn't always have to be in your lowest of lows, and just kind of like monumental big things that obviously make great music because it comes from like a place that's hard to reach unless you've kind of forced to get there. So I think there's some of that stuff that's dope. I'm hoping I might have to ask you, Shad, just like send us a picture or something.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that you can get the an audience. Just cuteness overlord is overload is never a bad thing. Just to entice people to come on. Thank you for checking out the first part of our podcast with Shad. I hope you enjoyed. Part 2 is going to be in a week or two. Again, stay tuned for that. And we get into the nitty-gritty of his album. And what it says about just the world, what the world is going on, what is going on in the world, and particularly with Black Lives Matter, and just the message that it has about fear and why our world is kind of the way that it is. We get into some deep stuff about his lyrics and why he wrote the album and what he was trying to communicate. And so, check us back out in a couple of weeks for part 2 of Shad's podcast.
Damn, it feels good to be back. Damn, it feels good to be black. They keep on killing us, we just keep killing it. Mama said killing is not where the ailing is. Couldn't speak back. Lord knows she been through it. She said a human is not who the villain is. She said it's fear, it's greed and it's pride. You see it inside. That's what the system is built on and what it instills in us. Man, I've been feeling this vibe. Honestly, the haters can hate.